Good Thinking Live is here in the house. Welcome to the show. If you're here early, let me know, or late, or anytime, let me know that you're here and where you're from. We're going to try to have a very interactive show today. And for people who are interested in how to think like an innovator, how to think like someone who is coming up with new ideas, you want to stick around because we're going to be tackling a kind of thinking called first principles thinking, which is very ancient and kind of more recently brought into kind of the business vernacular. But we're going to get into exactly what it is and how you can do that. And this is a form of good thinking that kind of covers three different realms. It covers all three legs of the good thinking stool. It covers critical thinking, it covers strategic thinking, and it covers creative thinking, the three legs of the good thinking stool. So absolutely let me know that you're here, where you're from. We've got some rubber chickens to give out to participants. I've got my green screen again today, so it's a little weird to see these rubber chickens because you hold them up and it doesn't really show, but we're going to get started. So, hey, Vasu from India, welcome. Our first good thinker on the show today. This is great. All right. So many of us, most of us, want to forge our own paths. It's not that we necessarily want to be innovators in every aspect of our lives. We don't want to come up with new things for every single thing we do because, a lot of the things we do, we learn from people who've done it before. And this is a great way to figure stuff out. Read books on best practices, read leadership books, read, how to achieve success, and then follow these templates. And this is a great way to do that. And, that's what I do all the time. That's what all of us, that's what we're doing here is kind of learning best practices. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. So, but we're going to find out how we can take that and do a little shift into how to create the kind of thinking that leads to new ideas, into innovative ideas, and who's done that in the past. And we have probably Aristotle to thank. Anyway, Stephen, greetings from Beervana. Fantastic. The home of beer. Jennifer, welcome from Felber. Jennifer Felber, welcome from Portland. And Alexis from Portland. We've got our Portland contingency in the house. All right. So should you be able to rely on the smartest people to make the most important decisions in your life? Yes or no? Should you, and this is not really a trick question. You think, okay, there's a right or wrong answer. There's not really a right or wrong answer. Should you rely on the smartest people that have made similar decisions to make those same decisions, to help guide your decisions? What do you think? Yes or no? Why the rubber chickens? Lee Sessions says, why the rubber chickens? Because the rubber chickens are the rewards you get for participation and good questions. And we valuing questions that can't be answered over answers that can't be questioned. So if you provide some of those, you get all the rubber chickens. It's kind of like, a rating system because I can't hold up tacos. All right. Should you be able to rely on the smartest people to guide your decisions? Yes or no? And we'll go on from there and I'll watch your answers and then we'll kind of go back and forth between your answers and some of the content. But, when you do this, when you're relying on this to solve complex problems, this is reasoning by analogy. And, we use analogy all the time when we're trying to understand concepts. We say, well, it's kind of like this. It's why all these, millions of business books get written every year. So reasoning by analogy is building knowledge and solving problems based on prior assumptions, beliefs, and widely held best practices. And they're approved by the majority of the people. So think about the coach who comes up with, looks at another coach and they say, oh, look at that cool play. And then they tweak, they borrow that and then they tweak accordingly. So it's a good guide. So Stephen says a guide, yes. Alexis says a guide, yes. And it's a great guide. And we don't need to come up with new solutions in every aspect of our lives. But on the flip side is first principles thinking. And Vasu says it depends on the situation, which is exactly right, because it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So first principles thinking is the kind of the flip side of reasoning by analogy. And this is the practice of actively questioning every assumption that come from every obstacle to what you're trying to achieve, and then boiling down the problem to its most basic component, and then building up from there to create a new solution. And this type of thinking is what you need when you want to create something new. Now, this, like I said, it goes back to, way back to Aristotle, but in recent times, Elon Musk has made it famous when he had this conversation with Kevin Rose about how he started SpaceX. And by the way, first principles thinking takes longer, because if you follow the map that has already been laid out before, you're going to be able to do things, with some level of predictability. There's always a tremendous amount of variability, so outcomes are uncertain, have a lot of uncertainty between every decision and every outcome. But if you follow, you're going to be able to kind of move more quickly. So Elon Musk wants to go to space. And I'm going to simplify this conversation, but it will show you exactly how he thought of first principles. And I'm going to borrow from 4 kind of first principle gurus to show you how you can do it too. All right. So Elon Musk wants to go to space. He goes to NASA. He says, I want to go to space. Again, I'm simplifying. They say, oh my gosh, it's way too expensive. You can't do this. So he goes to Russia, and they say, oh, it's too expensive. You can't do this. And so he says, why is this so expensive? Well, the components, the batteries, the components, whatever, are so expensive. And why are they so expensive? Well, because, you use them once, and can you reuse them? So here's what he said in his conversation with Kevin Rose. So he says, battery packs are really expensive, and that's just the way they will always be. You hear that all the time. How many of you have heard, that's just the way it is? And you think, well, why is it the way it is? Okay, that's your first step that you're kind of heading toward first principles thinking. How many of you have been told when you're presenting something that is really cool, new and innovative, can't do that because that's just the way it is? Yes? No? Have you said, that's just the way it is? Or you've never heard that because every time you've presented a great idea, people see the brilliance of your great idea? All right. So back to Elon. So Elon says, okay, historically, batteries have cost $600 per kilowatt hour. It's going to be much better than that in the future. But with first principles, you say, what are the material constituents of the batteries? So, and what's the stock market value of each of these constituent materials? And so you've got cobalt and nickel and aluminum and carbon and other things. So what if we bought these constituent components on like the London Stock Exchange, for example? So here he's taking it's an example of taking all the objections and asking why and breaking them down and then busting assumptions. So Jennifer and Vasu say, yeah, many times people have said, no, that's the way it's always been done. Now, that doesn't mean that what you're going to do is going to be so brilliant. It just means that you need to start shifting into first principles thinking. You might find that your idea is not good through using first principles thinking, but the idea is to identify the obstacles and the assumptions, and we're going to get right into that. So Elon does this, and he realizes and challenges this whole concept of, the cost of a battery and the cost of going to space. Now, he had a lot of failures, because innovation comes with a lot of failures. But then again, you're questioning your obstacles and identifying the assumptions. So this is a classic example. And he challenged these beliefs that were commonly held beliefs by asking Socratic questions. Thank you, Socrates. By uncovering basic truths about the components of batteries. That's a start. Again, a massive, massive, massive simplification. All right, so think about right now some new idea that you may have, and not everyone has a new idea, but something you're thinking, wow, could I do this? Maybe it's something small, maybe it's a new idea you've come up with. If you have any ideas, you can just put, yes, I have an idea, or you can even put your idea, and maybe we'll take your idea and try to bring it into this conversation today. Maybe we can dissect your idea using first principles and give you some tips. All right, Jeff Bezos is kind of the second guy, and I'm taking traditional, like current successful business people, but these examples are good and relevant. So Jeff Bezos talks about resisting proxies as a way to conduct first principles thinking. And in his very famous 2016 shareholder letter, he urges his readers to resist proxies. So if you're in market research or anything like that, you will see that you'll see the relevance in this. So proxies is like something else that was done. So he talks about if market research, you get these market research saying 60% of buyers like this or that, it's easy to then extrapolate that into the truth. So we can't, it's difficult to rely too heavily. You don't want to rely, rather, it's tempting, but you don't want to rely too heavily on processes or surveys. So he wrote, as companies get larger and more complex, there's a tendency to manage by proxies, and this comes in many shapes and sizes. Oops, sorry, I hit my microphone. That's what happens when you talk with your hands. A common example is process as a proxy. So he talks about when someone says, wait a minute, but I followed the process. I followed the process, and that's given as a reason for what you're doing, rather than questioning the process and saying, okay, what assumptions are embedded in this process? So if you hear, well, I followed the process. So how many of you have either thought to yourself, well, I followed the process? Or how many of you have heard someone say, well, I followed the process, as a justification for what they have done? Yes? How many of you have been in a company or a situation or a team where process is sacrosanct? Like, this is the process that we have to follow, and questioning the process is just like, no, it's a no. You never question whether there's a better way to do things. How many of you have been in a situation like that? All right, that's reasoning by analogy. That's not reasoning from first principles. The third guy, and in this case they're guys, but whatever, we'll forgive that, is my favorite. And this is Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning physicist. And he was a big proponent of first principle thinking. I love his book. I think it's called Surely You Must Be Joking, Mr. Feynman. I highly recommend this book. Stephen says, yes, too many times. Jennifer says so many times. Vasu says so many times. Too often. In healthcare. That's really, I'm glad Jennifer brought that up. In healthcare, you see this all the time because there are processes that need to be followed. That's why Checklist Manifesto is one of my favorite books about how incorporating these processes into healthcare. But the problem with that is if you get too reliant on these processes that you don't question, you don't question whether this objection or this outcome is the optimal outcome based on these processes. So questioning the assumptions embedded in the processes, healthcare, huge one. Back to Richard Feynman. So his dad was an avid bird watcher, and his dad could name all these birds. I don't know anything about birds, but like, okay, that's a cardinal, that's a sparrow, that's a robin, whatever. But this idea of being able to name things, give a label to things, is not the same as knowing things. When you know birds, you know their relationship to dinosaurs, and you understand their feather structure and how they fly. And that is the difference between knowing and knowing. So if you know the name of the bird in all the languages, you can say, okay, I can say sparrow in 10 different languages. Do you know that bird? And this is where we kind of make mistakes in our thinking, where we think we know something because we can label it, but we don't know because we haven't broken it down into its constituent parts, into its most fundamental truths, all the way down to the fundamental truth that we can no longer even figure out how to break it down any further. That's first principles thinking, and then reasoning up. So how do you do it? Well, the first thing is think about a problem. Well, think about, take healthcare. There's a problem in healthcare. If you want to put a problem that you would be interested in creating an innovative solution for right here, right now, like in this good thinking episode with this team of people that are all these good thinkers, put it in the chat and we'll use your example. And so we've got DJ Saltz, also from Portland. Fantastic. So we've got YouTubers, and we've got YouTube Live, and we've got LinkedIn Live, but you can't see each other. So if you have an idea or a problem, you think, gosh, how could we use this process to break it down? If not, I'm going to give an example, so you don't have to worry. But if you do and you want your problem interrogated with first principle thinking, we'll use it. So just put it in the chat. All right, so the first thing is you break problems down into the fundamental principles. And the best way to do this is to use powerful Socratic questioning. And this is a disciplined questioning process. It's used to establish truths and reveal underlying assumptions and separate knowledge from ignorance. And the key distinction between Socratic questioning and the normal discussions is that Socratic questioning seeks to draw out first principles in a really systematic manner. And it usually follows like this. First, you clarify your thinking by explaining the origin of your ideas. So let's say you have, we're going to get to a problem in just a minute, but let's just say you have an idea and you think, why do I think this? And this is kind of, you hear about the 5 whys. Why do I think this? What exactly do I think? What exactly, something that you really believe, like, why do I think that I have to get a degree to be able to get this job? We're going to get into, we'll use that as an example. Why do I think I have to get a degree to get this job? Well, what exactly do I think? The next step is challenging assumptions. So once you identify your kind of maybe your obstacles and you say, well, why do I think this? Then you identify the assumptions. So you say, well, how do I know that this is true? What if I thought the opposite? Like, what if I thought if I get a degree, I can't get this job? And you start thinking about your assumptions by confirming and disconfirming evidence. So this is a critical step, and we'll elaborate on assumptions in just a minute. All right. So not enough staff. So Jennifer says there's not enough nursing staff to fight illness. Okay. Not enough nursing staff to fight illness. Why do I think that this is true? Well, first of all, you have to break down what it means to fight, what it means, what illness is, and how you differentiate between illness and a natural progression of, aging, for example. And then you have to identify what you mean by nursing and what you mean by staff. First principle thinking, by the way, takes a long time, but it is the only path to true innovation. All right. So once you kind of break down what those mean without putting your preconceived notions in, why do I think that nursing means this? Why do I think that illness means this? Why do I think that fighting is what we need to do to overcome illness? Those kinds of assumptions. And then you look for evidence. How can I back this up? How can I back this up? What are the sources? So, well, I read that true nursing goes back to such and such, and the original source differentiates between nursing and caring, et cetera, et cetera. So you go to the original sources and you challenge the sources. So again, time consuming, but the rewards are great. Then you consider the alternative perspectives. What might others think? How do I know that I'm correct? And this is a difficult one because the difference between being wrong and being right, but being wrong and thinking you're right, rather, and being right and thinking you're right there's no difference to the way you feel. In other words, that's a clunky way of saying when we're wrong, but we think we're right, it feels exactly like being right. So that's a little bit of a trick. So you have to trick yourself out of this by saying, okay, I'm wrong. What does being wrong look like about this particular thing? And then you examine the consequences and implications. What if I'm wrong? What are the consequences if I am? And then you question the original question. Why did I think that? Why did I think not enough nursing staff to fight illness? Why did I think there is enough nursing staff to fight illness? Why did I think that these were even illnesses? Why did I even think that fighting illnesses is what we need to do? So really breaking down and questioning that whole process. And this stops you from relying on your gut. And if you want an episode on how to know when you can rely on your gut and when you can't, based on just massive amounts of evidence, let me know. Say, hey, I'd love to know when I'd love to do a good thinking on when we can trust our intuition. And we'll do one of those. A little break to say hi. Anyone here who has any questions, put them in the chat. Also, just reminding you, if you're here later in the non-live session, that we are here on Monday. I'm here on Mondays on LinkedIn Live. Good Thinking is here Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the United States, at 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And if you want to have notifications of the shows, you can subscribe at Becky Saltzman on my YouTube channel. We're trying to kind of get the YouTube channel up and cool and modern. So thank you, Dane, for that. Anyway, same thing. So back to the process for relying on your gut. If you want to know when you can and can't rely on your gut or intuition, let me know. Also wanted you to know that we are going to be having some great interviews coming up. So it won't just be me and y'all. It'll be us and someone else, or maybe two other people coming. So some really great, good thinking to give us a little bit of time to step away from all the time we're told on what to think, to devote a little bit more time to how to think. All right. So think about first principle thinking like those Matryoshka nesting dolls. You know, those Russian nesting dolls where one is inside the other, inside the other, inside the other. Think about your thinking where that is what you're doing, is you're getting to the fundamental, the principal idea. Like, okay, what does cobalt cost? How rare is it? Can you buy it on the London Stock Exchange? That kind of fundamental thinking about overcoming your obstacles and questioning assumptions. So let's do a little assumption busting. All right, let's just say, back to the assumption, getting the job I want will require that I get a degree. So first principle thinking would go like this. What do you really need to get the job you want? Well, I need to meet the person who could hire me. I mean, assuming you're not going to start your own company. But even then, you might need to say, I need to meet the person who will invest in me. I need to convince that person to hire me. Do I need a degree to meet that person? Do you need a degree to meet the person that would either invest in you or hire you? Do you think you need a degree? Well, one thing this quarantine has showed us, that busting some assumptions about what degrees look like and what we need to get jobs in now and in the future, if you're not questioning those kinds of things, you got to get back to a little first principles thinking, because it's time to rethink a lot of things about education. Not to say that you don't need a degree. This is about getting down to first principles thinking. So do you need a degree to convince the person that you meet that could give you the job? Who is this person? And who does this person listen to? How do they make their decisions? All right. So that's an example number one. Maybe you have something like starting a business will cost a lot of money. All right. That's an obstacle to your starting a business. So then you do first principle thinking. You identify the obstacle, and then you kind of challenge the assumptions. You identify and then try to bust the assumption. So what do you need to start a business? Well, I need to sell products or services to customers. Does it have to cost a lot of money to sell to new customers? Well, not necessarily, but I'll probably need some kind of inexpensive access to these new customers. Well, okay, well, who has access to these customers? Well, maybe there's someone else that sells some other product to these customers, and they might want to partner with me and share in the profits. This is the kind of questioning the assumptions that you need for first principles thinking. Or here's another assumption. I have to struggle and starve to become an artist. Well, what do you really need to create great work and make a living as an artist? Well, you would need reasonably sized audience that could pay for your work and would appreciate, but that audience needs to appreciate your work more than they appreciate the money that they have. And how do you reach that audience? Well, you probably need to do something like self-promoting. Well, I don't like self-promoting. It's too braggadocious. Okay, is there a way for you to promote your work without feeling that way, or without being sleazy, or feeling sleazy rather? So then you kind of go from there. Well, assumption, I can't find enough time to work out and lose weight. All right, well, what do you really need to lose weight? I need to exercise more, probably at least 5 days a week for an hour. Well, could you still manage to lose weight by exercising less frequently? If so, how? That's the kind of thing where you identify the obstacles and you question the assumptions. So not to belabor, this is kind of, you identify the obstacles, you break it down to the core elements, and then you create new solutions from scratch. So does anyone have any questions about first principles thinking? Any at all? Any questions about first principles thinking? Now, you might end up with failure in your innovation or of your ideas. That is just a step along the path, because then you just kind of restart the whole process again. Okay, well, what are the assumptions? Challenge the assumptions, identify. If you're coming up with a new recipe for the first time, you know, I love to watch that show Chopped, but there is a difference between the way I would do it and the way someone who is truly a chef could innovate around those products. They would get down to the core fundamentals. And sometimes on Chopped, they throw in an ingredient. It always kind of scares me. They throw in an ingredient that maybe could be poison if you don't prepare it a certain way. Well, then you need to get down, is this ingredient poison? Well, me as a cook, yes. But as a chef, you could break down the fundamentals like, okay, why is the puffer fish poisonous? Well, because it has this whatever. And then, okay, well, could you remove that whatever? Or what is the chemical compound of that whatever? Is it stable? Could you heat it up and make it not poisonous? This is the kind of thing that is kind of an example of first principles thinking in the world of cooking. I always worry about, what if I get an ingredient and I don't know what to do with it? Because I don't know enough about so I have to do the research, down to the first principles. Anyway, that's really it. The last one is Peter Thiel. True innovation comes from discovering an important fundamental truth that few people agree with you on, like a secret. And he talks about the difference between achieving vertical process, like going from 0 to 1 versus from 1 to n. So that's he uses kind of a computer programmer's analogy. But we've got Peter Thiel and Richard Feynman and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk all giving examples using different kinds, thinking, eliminating proxies, understanding the difference between labels and knowing, Richard Feynman, 0 to 1 and 1 to n, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk, really fundamentally getting down to first principles procedure to do something that people said could not be done. So usually when we're faced with complex problems, we default to thinking like everyone else. But first principles thinking is a powerful way to help you break out of the herd mentality, think kind of outside of what everyone else, and also discover roots of creation by asking how and why. And first principles thinking cuts through the dogma and removes the blinders so you can see the world as it is. And that allows you not to be woo-woo, whatever, to see possibilities. Carla, what are your times again for your show? I'm in Central Time. Okay, fantastic. So we are 9 a.m. Pacific time in the West Coast here in the United States on Mondays. 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So on the East Coast, you'd be Central, you'd be 11. If you're in the West and the Midwest, 11 o'clock Monday mornings. And also, if you subscribe to Becky Saltzman, my YouTube channel, that will give you notifications of upcoming shows. We're here most Mondays, some Mondays not, but I'm so glad you good thinkers are here. And I would be very curious if you're watching this later, let me know what questions you have about first principles thinking. But also, if you end up using this in any way to come up with something new and original, innovative, please let me know, because it's a very powerful tool when you are told, that's just not how it's done. That is true. It's not how it has been done. But is it possible that you can come up with a better way of thinking? Thanks. Have a great week.